The nation has been rightly focused this week on the state of weather, the movement of bushfires, and now mass evacuation on both sea in Victoria and road in southern New South Wales. But in the midst of all of this today, I wanted to make two important points. Firstly, once again today, we've had charges laid against someone who allegedly and inexplicably lit at least one fire deliberately. That's the allegation. A 36-year-old man was charged based on evidence gathered in the East Gippsland town of Johnsonville. Now, bear in mind, in these weather conditions, an arsonist lighting one fire, one single fire, can lead to scores of other fires being started through the fast movement of embers. And those same embers can help destroy homes and in turn claim lives. Now remember, there are 17 people unaccounted for in East Gippsland tonight. Meanwhile, police in Tasmania also suspect that arsonists played a major role in blazes in that state as well. What mongrels they all are. Now, I know we've done a lot in Australia about locating and listing where pedophiles reside for the safety of young children, but let me put this to you. In a country which suffers from drought-fuelled firestorms, given how seldom hazard reduction is done nowadays because of green activism, and given how incredibly destructive a single act of arson is, how about a register of arsonists, where they reside and what they've been convicted of? Don't tell me an act of arson is not potentially catastrophic or deadly. It is. We all know it is. We've seen it. This is Australia, in one of our worst droughts. That idea, I think, is worth considering when this season is done and dusted. Secondly, last night I told you about how politicised these bushfires have become. The Greenies haven't stopped blaming CO2 emissions and, bizarrely, blaming the Prime Minister. The latter argument is just unscientific and dumb. I pointed out how the ABC in East Gippsland had conveniently and inexplicably played their own green politics and erased an online report showing Greenie protesters last year preventing the burning of many hectares of national park land. The Victorian Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning called the activism reckless and irresponsible as it stopped the reduction of deadly fuel loads. Now, someone at the ABC just didn't want these protests to remain public, given the deadly fires that roared through the region. That can only be the conclusion you can come to. Well, the people at the Cauldron Pool, which is a website that pursues media who bend the truth and calls for common sense, have found another culprit today, this time SBS, another taxpayer-funded media identity, of course. Yesterday, Cauldron Pool discovered that a story published in 2013 by SBS, which quoted bushfire expert and former Monash University scientist David Packham, had been erased as well this week. Gone, vanished. Back then, Packham did not believe that climate change was having an impact on bushfires. This is 2013. Not yet. He explained that it's primarily the dryness of the fuel. That's certainly not the Green narrative. That's not what they want to hear. So maybe that's why it vanished. But when Cauldron Pool highlighted this yesterday online, a new David Packham story on SBS was published, a kind of update, I guess, replacing the old story. But while it highlighted Packham's previously held views, it did try to outdate his comments by stating SBS has attempted to contact Mr Packham on whether he holds the same views he expressed in the original 2013 article, refuting links between climate change and bushfires at that time. In other words, they doubt whether he would. Well, sorry, people. David Packham was on the Macquarie Media Network and Sky News about 2 weeks ago, and he said this.
I was terribly surprised when they appeared and put out this line that the fires are due to climate change, when everybody who knows anything about the principles and a little bit of the science of bushfire behaviour knows that that is not the case. It is, as Bronwyn Bishop said the other night on Sky News, it is the fuel.
Yes, the bushfire expert and scientist says he still does hold that view. Message SBS. I hope you update that story tomorrow. Now, if and when average world temperatures rise above 2 degrees Celsius in the future, he might change his mind. But right now, he's with the Prime Minister, who wants to look very closely at fuel loads and the amount of hazard reduction that's not being done.
The impact more broadly of climate change, drought and these issues can have a pronounced effect, does have a pronounced effect on the length of the fire season. So that equally then has a need to address issues around hazard reduction in national parks, dealing with land clearing laws, zoning laws and planning laws around people's properties and where they can be built in countries like Australia, up and down our coast. That being the case with the climatic effects of what we're seeing, then there have been many restrictions put around those issues that now I think would have to be reviewed on the basis of the impact of the broader climatic effects that we're seeing in this country.
Let me decode what he meant. Lift the restrictions. Allow people to take their firewood from parks as we used to do. Allow some cattle that border onto national parks and state recreation reserves to graze. Do what we used to do when we could control some of the biggest firestorms. He is dead right. That's what most farmers are saying as well, whose property's back onto national parks, and we've proved that by talking to some of these landholders on this program this summer. We should be doing a whole lot more.